Not all fairy tales bring comfort. Some twist, loop, and open doors best left closed. Fairy Tales That Should Not Be Read is a collection of strange, whimsical, and slightly unsettling stories. They don't give easy answers. They make you think. They don't entertain. They transform. Why shouldn't they be read? Because they linger. Because they change you. Step into a world where reality bends. Listen carefully. The City of Lost Sparks. The City of Lost Sparks is a tale about how life can slowly lose its colours and the world its meaning. The main character, Mr. No Inspiration, is trapped in routine, where days blur into an endless loop. But one day, he receives a mysterious letter that leads him to the Centre for Lost Lights. This journey forces him to see the world differently, to notice the little things he had ignored, to feel warmth he thought was lost, and to rediscover his missing spark of life. Told in the whimsical style of Lewis Carroll, this story is a metaphor for depression, emotional exhaustion, and the path to rekindling one's inner light. It reminds us that meaning and inspiration are never truly lost. They are simply waiting to be seen again. Listen to the latest episode of Fairy Tales That Should Not Be Read, where words become a journey to finding your own spark. Sparkles. In a distant city where all windows were always shut and the sky never changed colour, there lived a man named Mr. No Inspiration. He wasn't sad, nor was he happy. He simply was. Every morning he woke up precisely at 7, left his house exactly at 8, and arrived at work, where he performed the crucial task of moving papers from one stack to another. This is very important, everyone said. This is necessary, Mr. No Inspiration told himself. And yet, every morning it became harder to get out of bed. Day by day, his clothes grew duller, his food more tasteless. He even stopped listening to music. Every note sounded the same. And then, one day, he simply stopped getting up. "You're late, Mr. No Inspiration," shrieked his alarm clock. "So what?" he replied indifferently. The papers didn't scream. The work didn't demand. The sun didn't scold him. Days passed, or perhaps weeks. Time in the City of Lost Sparks never rushed. An unexpected dream. That night, for the first time in a long while, Mr. No Inspiration didn't fall asleep immediately. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, which had nothing new to tell him, and listening to the silence, which had never been particularly interested in him anyway. But the moment he closed his eyes, he found himself in a place that likely didn't exist. He stood in an endless corridor, its walls made of faded calendars, and instead of lamps, sighing clocks hung from the ceiling, refusing to tell time. "You've lost something important," said a voice that could have belonged to either a small boy or a very old shoe. "I haven't lost anything," Mr. No Inspiration replied, weary. "Then why are you here?" He wanted to argue that this was a mistake, that he had simply fallen asleep in the wrong direction, that this was probably just a nonsense dream. But then he saw the door. A plaque on it read, "Department of Lost Sparks. Press if ready to remember." "This seems familiar," he murmured, reaching for the handle. The doors opened by themselves. Inside, he saw a room full of tiny flickering lights. Each one was contained in a jar of a colour he couldn't quite name. "Excuse me, did you lose something?" asked the room's guardian, a figure that looked at once like a teapot, a librarian, and perhaps just a little like the moon. I don't know what I lost," Mr. No Inspiration admitted, bewildered. And with that, the dream dissolved. Mr. No Inspiration awoke, feeling that something had changed. His room looked the same, but the air smelled different, as if a fallen star had left a trace of itself nearby. He got up, walked to the door, and opened it. On the doorstep lay an envelope. "Your spark is waiting for you. Retrieve it at the Centre for Lost Lights." He had no idea who had sent the letter, but now he knew where to go. He knew. The Center for Lost Lights. The journey took longer than expected. At first, the city seemed dark and empty. The streets he had walked his entire life appeared dull and lifeless. Has it always been this way? He wondered. He had never paid attention to the details. But when he finally stopped rushing, he started seeing more. A child's drawing on a wall, one he had never noticed before. An old musician on the street corner playing the violin, his melody sending an unfamiliar shiver through his chest. "I don't feel anything," he whispered. But his heart disagreed. The Center for Lost Lights was at the end of a street that didn't exist on any map. Inside, shelves stretched as far as the eye could see, filled with thousands of jars, boxes, and bottles. Behind the counter sat a guardian in a hat that glowed from within. "Aha! Finally!" the guardian exclaimed. "A spark, you say? Just a moment." He rummaged through an endless list. Yes. Your spark was checked in. Quite some time ago. Do you have your paperwork? I don't know what would even be in it, Mr. No Inspiration admitted. "No problem. We'll try another method," the guardian said. "Describe what it looked like." "It was warm," he hesitated. "It made me get out of bed. It felt like..." He stopped, because he couldn't remember. "That's all right," the guardian smiled. "Your spark is here. But in order to take it back, there's one thing you must do." "What?" "You have to ignite it first. That will make it easier to find." "How?" "Step outside. Start noticing things." "But I don't feel anything." "That doesn't mean feelings aren't there. It just means you haven't been paying attention." Mr. No Inspiration wasn't convinced, but since he had come this far... The journey back. Mr. No Inspiration walked home along the same path, but it no longer felt straight. The streets twisted and turned as if trying to race him forward, then suddenly paused, as if forgetting where they were leading. Buildings, once just walls and windows, now appeared as sleeping giants, wrapped in blankets of brick. The streetlights didn't just stand in silence, they whispered amongst themselves. "Do you think he'll notice?" asked one. "What if he does?" replied another, and indeed he began noticing. A drawing in chalk on the pavement, a pink cat with wings that surely knew how to fly, but had chosen to stay. An old woman feeding pigeons, who seemed to be negotiating a treaty with her handbag. A cafe window where someone was laughing. "I've never seen this before," he murmured. "That's because you never looked," came a voice. He turned, but no one was there. And then the rain came. Not cold, not piercing, gentle like a memory that no longer hurt. Raindrops slid down his shoulders, trickled over his fingertips, and for the first time in a very long while, he smiled. And that was when he saw it, his spark. It had never been waiting in the Center for Lost Lights. It had never been locked in some dusty old jar. It had always been here, right beside him. It shimmered in the glow of the streetlights swaying in the rain. It reflected in windows filled with warmth and life. It danced in every small moment he had almost missed, but finally caught. He stopped, allowing the warmth inside him to spread like the glow of a lamp in a dark room. "There you are," he said, as if greeting an old friend, and his spark burned brighter. Because that's how it worked. The more you open yourself to the world, the brighter it shines. Moral: depression is not the absence of happiness, it is the forgetting of what could bring it. A lost spark doesn't need to be found again, it only needs to be reignited by noticing the small details of the world around you. Sparkles,